Your son comes home from school and tells you that one of his classmates has sudden outbursts and that he's scared of him. You take your daughter to the mall and she sees a child in a wheelchair about her age, and instead of saying hello, she simply just stares at them. These are behaviors that we may deem acceptable in children, but what happens when those behaviors are not corrected and they carry on into adulthood? Today I want to talk to you about the importance of classroom inclusion and how it benefits not only a non-typically developing child, but also your typically developing child. I believe that this topic is relevant to today because in more and more schools across the country, children are being bullied. Bullying is not coming to an end. Bullying is not stopping anytime soon. And with an increase in special education classrooms, in general education schools, we're seeing more and more children with typically educationally developing issues being placed in a dark classroom, shut off from their peers. This is because there isn't enough classroom inclusion. And people that are not exposed to people with special needs are therefore not educated on it. I grew up with a special needs sister. I watched kids look at her and stare at her when I would take her to lunch or to dinner or to the movies or to the mall to go shopping. And instead of saying hello, I watched parents tell their children, "Don't stare, turn away, you're making me look bad." And again, this is all very common behavior in children, but if it carries on into adulthood, it does a disservice not only to the special needs community, but also to the children that are going to turn into adults that don't know how to properly treat people. Ignorance is everywhere, but I believe that classroom inclusion is the key to teaching children how to treat other people. And I know what you're thinking, why should I listen to this girl who isn't a special educator, she isn't a teacher, but she wants to stand up here and talk about classroom inclusion? Why should you listen to me? Because I have a special needs sister. Because I grew up watching people mistreat her and not say hello. Watching children her age ignore her while we were at the mall and she was shopping for an outfit to wear to school. Why should you listen to me? Because I worked in a special needs school. I was one-on-one with a child who had autism, and I took him to a general ed school to try to get him involved with his peers who would become his future classmates next year. And I watched as they shuddered in fear when he twitched, or when he had an outburst, or when he shouted a word, because it was unfamiliar to them. And again, typical behavior, but what happens when that transforms into adolescence and then ultimately into adulthood? I could stand up here all the live long day and tell you why I'm so passionate about classroom inclusion, but we're limited on time, and I know nobody wants to sit around longer than they have to listen to me talk about classroom inclusion. So let's just cut to the point. I want to tell you guys why I believe in classroom inclusion because of the benefits that I have seen come from it. Let's talk about what inclusion means for the non-typically developing child, so the special needs child. In a research article done by a doctor, her name is Lilla Dale McManus, she discusses that the benefits of classroom inclusion for the special needs child can transpire in many different ways. It can include an increase in academic skills, such as math or social studies, but also an increase in friendship, because that child is interacting with a typically developing child and a friendship transpires. So it benefits them not only academically, but also socially. It teaches them different social skills. How does it benefit a typically developing child? More than you would imagine. In the same research article, she discusses that by working with special needs children, it teaches that child responsibility. It teaches that child how to treat other people, and it helps that child also form friendships. This is what I call the planting a seed metaphor. It's something that I used as an example when I was working with special needs children. So what happens when you plant a seed? Well, first you dig up the dirt, you plant the seed, you cover it up, and then you water it. What happens if you don't water it? Nothing comes of it, nothing grows. But what happens when you do water it? Something beautiful comes from it, a flower, an apple tree, something worth admiring, because something beautiful grew from watering that seed. Let's talk a little bit about the statistical proof behind classroom inclusion. There was another study, a research article done by Dr. Su-Young Hong, in which he gathered a group of students. They all worked together, and at the end of the year, 6 out of 9 of those students, the typically developing students, were more likely to interact with the non-typically developing students. Now, although I would like 9 out of 9 students to want to associate with the non-typically developing, I'll take the 6 out of 9. I'll take those numbers. Now, wouldn't you want your child to be one of those 6 out of 9 students? Don't you want your child to be the kid that takes the other child out to recess, or takes a book over and reads with the other kids? Or do you want your kid to be one of the others? One of the other kids that doesn't associate, that doesn't want to become friends or make friends, or be that kid that goes out of his way to make another person feel accepted and loved? Don't you want your kid to be one of the 6 out of 9 that made the other student feel loved and feel appreciated? It also will help them to make friends, becoming more accepting and more understanding of the child with special needs. And then that carries on into adulthood, because your child now understands. They have a basic understanding of children with special needs. So let's go back to my previous statement in the beginning. You take your daughter to the mall. She sees a child in a wheelchair. But this time, she says hello. Why? Because she learned how to do it in school. She learned how to say hello. She doesn't need her mom to tell her not to stare, because she's not staring. She's saying hello. She wants to make a friend. She wants to make that child feel loved and feel accepted and feel important, because she knows that that child is no different than her, because she learned that in school. So let's discuss a little bit about how these actions then transpire into adolescence and into adulthood. Back to my previous statement about how I've seen it, I've been exposed to it. I've seen kids my age, I've seen teenagers completely ignore a person in a wheelchair. I've seen a grown man in Applebee's complain to the waitress that the child with autism who's having an outburst is ruining his family dinner. What kind of mindset do you think that implements into his children that are at the table? That it's completely acceptable to treat other people like they're nothing, like they're a bother, simply because they're different? Let's come up with a different scenario. Let's say that this man, while growing up and in school, went to a general ed school. Let's say that one of his classmates had autism, very similar to the young man at the restaurant. Let's say he had outbursts. Early onset exposure sets children up for these types of behaviors, because then they become familiar with them. If this man had been exposed to people with special needs, he may have a different mindset. He may have a different opinion, and he may know how to handle the situation differently. Some people are born with a heart of gold, and unfortunately, some people aren't, and they need a little bit of education. And unfortunately, sometimes the parents aren't willing to educate their children, because even they're not educated on the situation. So if you don't know how to educate your child, let the teachers do it. Classroom inclusion could be what changes children's mindsets and therefore sets them up for success in the future and teaches them how to treat people differently. Because once you're already educated on it, you already know how to handle it. You already know how to approach it. That child that took a book over to his Down syndrome classmate and sat with him and read with him set an example for every other kid in that classroom. Set an example for his classmates that their classmate is exactly like them. 9 times out of 10, if a kid sees their friend do something, they're more apt to do it. So little Jimmy, who took a book over to his friend, all of his friends are going to come over and read because they want to know what Jimmy's doing. They want to know what he's doing. Jimmy's going to set an example for his classmates. He's going to go home and set an example for his parents, for his siblings, and ultimately, as he transitions through adolescence and adulthood, he's going to set an example for the people around him, including his own children, and then the cycle continues. Like I said, some people are born with kindness in their heart and some aren't, and some people need to be educated. But we can't get angry at the children who aren't educated and don't know how to treat others simply because they haven't been exposed to it. It's our job as educators, as parents, as decent human beings to educate the younger generation and teach them how to treat their classmates, their friends, and the people around them. How to treat the little girl in the mall in a wheelchair. How to treat my sister while she's out shopping or at the movies. I hope that in this short time, you guys have been able to take away something. The importance of classroom inclusion and what it can do for our generation and for generations to come. Because like I said, what happens when you plant a seed? You dig up the dirt, put the seed in, water it, something beautiful comes from it. Don't you want your child to be that something beautiful? Don't you want your child to be that apple tree, to be that flower that grows into something beautiful simply because you planted a seed? Simply because their teacher planted a seed? Classroom inclusion benefits the non-typically developing child, but it also benefits your typically developing son, daughter, and it teaches them how to respect the kids around them, sets them up for success, sets the future up for success, because this world is not very kind. So go home, plant a seed, and watch it turn into something beautiful. Thank you.